I'm Billy S, welcome to the channel. Last week we ranked my favourite boss from each of From Software's DLCs. This week we're ranking my least favourite boss from each of From Software's DLCs. Now this doesn't mean every boss on this list is going to be awful. Most of the DLCs have a small pool of bosses to choose from, and sometimes that pool is made up of genuinely great fights. Curious about my aforementioned best bosses video? Check the description for a link. And with that being said, my least favourite boss from each Soulsborne DLC, ranked. Let me know yours down below. We're starting off strong, as Dark Souls Artorias of the Abyss is one of From Software's strongest DLCs in regards to its boss lineup. There's not a single miss, from Manus to Calamite to Artorias, and then at the back of the pack is the Sanctuary Guardian. This chimera is fought the moment you enter the DLC, as you're warped into a cavern before its boss arena and tasked with slaying it to even access the Royal Wood and beyond. The level of aggression the Sanctuary Guardian displays is unlike anything you've fought in the main game up to this point. With fast combo strings that have far less downtime than you're used to, it's a boss that teaches you how this DLC is going to speed up the combat, and you have to get good or get out. His electric attacks are amplified by the water around the arena, and his poison tail can toxic you, spelling the end of your run if you get hit by it. He moves around a ton, making him hard to hit, but compensates for this by having a small health pool. If you have a strength weapon like me, you can take this guy out in a handful of hits. Sanctuary Guardian may be the worst boss of this DLC pack, and its placement may make it a rather forgettable encounter for a vast majority of the player base, but by no means is it a bad fight. Underrated, I'd say. Moving on to Dark Souls 2, we start off with the Crown of the Sunken King, and there's a clear winner for this category. Some may try to claim that Alana is the worst fight of the DLC because of her summoning mechanics, or because they're just not a fan of her pyromancies, but I'm not under any delusions. The optional boss fight with the Gank Squad takes this entry. Serra, the Old Explorer, Ancient Soldier Varg, and the Afflicted Grave Robber are an NPC fight where you take on the three of them at the same time. We've got Budget Havel, Alva, and Lucatiel, purchased from a nearby Asda, and I can't help but roll my eyes, to be honest. While I'm not against NPC fights if done well, the fact that we paid for this DLC and we got given a boss made of reused assets in an attempt to create a small amount of fan service hidden behind one of the worst areas in the game just hasn't sat right with me. On top of that, the damage these guys can dish out is insane. Varg can one-shot even the highest level characters, and God forbid he's able to parry or get a backstab on you. That Dragon's Tooth will destroy you. Serra is the weak link, often hiding behind the rest of the party, so if you can kite the other two into a side path and beeline it for the archer, it's possible to get him before they get you. Their pathing is honestly pretty good, they can keep up with the player more often than not, and you will have moments where you don't expect them to be breathing down your neck until they jump scare you. The Grave Robber is the best balanced of the bunch, with a nice combination of offense and defense, thus making him my preferred NPC of the three. But that's like comparing getting shot in the foot with getting shot in the leg, it still sucks. This fight has its defenders, check my community ranking of the Dark Souls 2 bosses for more info there, but I just can't find enjoyment in this fight. It's always a chore for me when I replay this game. Crown of the Old Iron King is honestly the GOAT. Dark Souls 2 has over 40 bosses, and the 3 in this DLC are all in my top 5. How iconic is that? And yet, Blue Smelter Demon, you're going to have to take the seat. That being said, this is easily my favourite fight I'll be talking about in today's video. Blue Smelter Demon may be a rematch with a boss from the base game, but if you really need to reuse assets, this is how you do it. Create a boss everyone's familiar with, then change up its speed and tells to purposefully fuck with the muscle memory everyone developed from the Iron Keep variant. It's a smart way of executing a challenge, because you have to go from square one and relearn the fight with the new attack strings. The new pace feels more in line with modern Souls games, Dark Souls 3 onwards, which provides a nice challenge for the player who still has to use the slower, clunkier Dark Souls 2 player systems. And yet I'd say I have an easier time with this guy than the base game variant. Maybe that's why I like him so much? His boss run back is also far less painful than the equivalents in the other 2 DLCs. I genuinely don't have any negatives here. Blue Smelter just got exceptionally unlucky in this video, being in the same DLC as Sir Alon and the Fume Knight, the 2 most universally well-regarded fights from Dark Souls 2. Yippee! I get to talk about Lud and Zalin, the king's pets again. I'm just so lucky, aren't I? For any new viewers, Lud and Zalin are in contention for my most hated Soulsborne boss in existence. And I doubt that remotely comes as a shock. After all, I don't know a single person who adores this fight, or that hellish run back through the frigid outskirts. It's a shame though, because for all the shit these bosses get, I can see a genuinely good gank beneath that layer of grime. The first cat will start the fight off solo, and it's up to you to fight your way through their moveset, taking down as much health as you can. The goal is to kill the first boss before the second joins the fray, as once 2 of them are bouncing around the arena at once, your ability to keep track of them while also avoiding magic attacks and claw swipes becomes significantly hampered. Once one cat goes down, the other will also take the time to buff themselves with dark magic, which makes their attacks stronger and gives them the ability to heal themselves when at low health. It's always a heated moment when this happens, because it's always right when I'm about to deliver the last few blows, and then I'm thrown out of my rhythm and start to make mistakes. Then there's the fact they're reused assets from the same DLC pack. At least with the Gank Squad and Blue Smelter, they were reused assets from the base game. Here, we're already cheapening the fight with Ava, and that's a real shame because she's such a good boss that she gets overshadowed by her rather lackluster brothers. If the Frigid Outskirts boss run back didn't exist and was instead just a normal run to the boss fog, these guys wouldn't be as hated, and I recognize that, but that's not the world we live in. Definitely my least favorite boss fight in today's video. Stepping into Bloodborne, I know there's a large contingency of people who want to throw Lawrence, the first Vicar, under the bus, because he's easily the most polarizing of the bosses in the Old Hunters DLC, but I've always enjoyed his fight, even if my last playthrough definitely had me experiencing some of his flame AoE bullshit. Now, as much as I'd like to play Devil's Advocate, the Living Failures are the worst boss of the Old Hunters, and it's not close. Found atop the research hall, these large celestials all share a community health bar, and are willing to throw their weight around to smack you into oblivion. If you come here without decent DPS or a low health stat, they can actually 2 or 3 shot you, happened to me in my very first Bloodborne playthrough. Otherwise, you can melt them relatively easily. The main dangers are their magic attacks, the first being an orb they can fire at you from off-screen. It's relatively easy to avoid them, but that doesn't mean a stray orb won't catch you off guard every now and then. Then there's the meteor attack. They rain down from the sky, and you have to use the Shadow Tree giant sunflower to block the rocks. The meteors always come from the same direction, so the attack honestly becomes a non-factor once you're used to it. I wish the direction of the meteors changed each time the spell was used, perhaps in the direction the Living Failures lift their arms up to. Give the players a bit more to keep track of, it would make this fight more interesting. They're not bad. I honestly think Bloodborne is a very strong boss roster, and even the bad fights have redeeming qualities or are memeable enough to stand on their own 2 feet. They said, Celestial Emissary, sit the fuck down, and they were right. Entering Dark Souls 3's Ashes of Ariandel, it's in a unique position, as there are only 2 boss fights to choose from, the least from any DLC pack. And as Sister Frida was on our best list, Champion's Gravetender and Champion's Great Wolf, you're here by default, my friends. Not that they wouldn't be here regardless, I don't see a single timeline where the Gravetender Great Wolf duo aren't on this list. They're one of my least favourite fights in the series just for being absolutely uninspired. The Gravetender doesn't justify his own existence as a boss, with a rather lackluster moveset whose only reason for being is to advertise the weapon he wields, as well as giving players a way to access the PvP content that was added in the DLC. And the Great Wolf is just the same enemy we'd seen in the Ariandel snowfield potentially twice already. He has some ice breath attacks he learns, and charge attacks, but so did Vort of the Boreal Valley, and he's an infinitely better boss. There's no originality here, and it's so disappointing given how I actually enjoyed the hidden nature of how to access this boss, and the actual arena design being drop-dead gorgeous. Chilling under Priscilla's tower is such a Giga Chad move, only to be completely wasted on the most forgettable boss in the entire series. While I have a soft spot for Ashes of Ariandel, I can understand why people were so disappointed with this DLC when you pay full price only to get one zone and 2 bosses, especially after Old Hunters just a few years prior, and Gravetender feels like the epitome of what people didn't like. If you want to see a better variant of this boss fight, check out my video on the Dark Souls Archthrones mod for Dark Souls 3, where they actually created a boss fight that was the champions Gravetender and Great Wolf, but good. I'm not kidding, it's great. Link down below. The Ringed City is another case where a majority of the bosses are top tier, which means the sole middle-of-the-road fight gets shafted onto today's list. Half-Light's Spear of the Church is an NPC invasion fight where if you play online, you'll face another player in a combat to the death, while if you play offline, you'll face an AI who, at least for me, knew how to put up one hell of a fight. I will die on the hill that Half-Light himself isn't a bad fight. If he were on his own, his kit is more than enough to provide a satisfying bout. He's got ranged abilities like his bow, his thunder spears that are up from the ground, and decent melee options that keep me on my toes. I also suck at NPC fights, so that might have a little something to do with it. The problem with this fight is Judicator Argo chilling in the corner, summoning 2 Church Guardians to help Half-Light throughout the fight. The Church Guardians serve as annoying distractions, and if you try to focus on them, Half-Light will capitalize and use one of his strong moves to get you while your back's turned. Yes, it makes the fight harder, but this is a case where I don't think the fight needs to be challenging. After all, this isn't the fight people in the DLC are clamoring for. Gale is, and you have to defeat Half-Light to fight Gale, so naturally Half-Light was going to receive ire for his inclusion by people who just want to fight the Slave Knight. Sadly, when your competition is the Demon Prince, Gale, and Meevee, there was never going to be a timeline where Half-Light was able to overcome them as an NPC invasion fight. Even if it was the best fine-tuned battle known to mankind, they just don't have the same energy, and that's such a shame. Finally, we have Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree. For the purposes of this list, I'm going to focus on the main bosses from the DLC, because it would be a bit boring if I was like, ah yes, the random Deathrite bird in Charo's Hidden Grave is my least favourite boss. But I am going to give a special honourable mention to Ancient Dragon Senesax in the Jagged Peak. It's a base game Ancient Dragon, but in an arena filled with water, specifically so players will get shocked by the extra lightning damage from its attacks. While I appreciate their attempt to make the fight more interesting with this caveat, it's just not fun. My official vote will instead go to the Golden Hippopotamus found in the Shadowkeep. I'm actually replaying Shadow of the Erdtree on New Game Plus at the moment, and I've only refought a few bosses, but I'm learning that the hippo is just a bit bland for a replay. I'm grateful the grab got fixed. That was a real game changer, and it makes this fight so much more bearable now I'm experiencing it. But it doesn't change the fact I'm just fighting a big beast that chomps with his mouth and has a crucible incantation midway through the fight that still shreds all my health at Shadowtree Blessing 20. At least with other contentious fights like Commander Gaius and his infamous charge, I can block that, and I have a strategy to counter his other moves while still retaining some control of the fight. With the hippo, it just feels like a DPS race where we're trading blows until one of us drops dead, and more often than not, it's me. I'll have a round or two where I dodge his attacks relatively well, and I'll feel like I'm improving, but honestly, I don't particularly want to learn his moveset. Hot take, I don't find him interesting enough to dedicate that much of my time to beyond my initial playthrough, and the fact I'm seriously debating just going through the flooded church district to skip him says it all. I don't want to skip any of the other main bosses in this DLC. They elicit more of a response from me, positive or negative, But I guess I'm just the most disappointed in the Golden Hippo, because from the brief snippets we got in the trailer for this DLC, I was so hyped to see this boss and its abilities, only to end up very whelmed. And that's my list. Which DLC bosses are your least favourite from each pack? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow me if you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Discord. My Twitter is the best place to go. I'm honestly not that active on my Discord, I don't know why I have it. I think it's just a nice way for people to see I've uploaded, because I got a videos tab. A massive shout out to all of my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. Thank you so much, you guys are amazing, and I will see you next time for another video. Adios!